The meetups by going around and just introducing ourselves, name, kind of, you know, where we work. Not really, you don't have to share that, share whatever you'd like. But kind of why you're here and, you know, kind of what you're looking to get out of the meetup. And so we'll start in a corner, if a corner would like to volunteer. If a corner would not like to volunteer, we'll start somewhere that is not in the corner.
In another corner, volunteer another corner?
Well, yes, but you've got a corner volunteer, so the corner,
Jason Coates, autotrader.com, mobile software engineer. We're doing a lot of hybrid app development and increasing my JavaScript space.
John Horvath with Optima Healthcare Systems. I've been doing JavaScript for about 14 years. And, a lot of stuff recently has been with Backbone and dealing with a lot of new patterns, so this seems right up my alley.
Cassandra Mercer. I work for Georgia Systems Operations Corporation. We do JTEE development, and we're actually getting into EXTJS for our websites. Laura Moore, research in motion, trying to hide away, or trying to recover as being an architect and keep my skills sharp as for the development team.
Jason Sotino, a Java developer for Computer Technologies. So I'm here, want to learn more about JavaScript and other frameworks as well.
I'm Stephen Thomas. I'm the user experience architect for Dell SecureWorks.
Howard Ford, senior web developer from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. I'm just trying to soak it all up.
Mark Fisher, I'm a software developer with Department of Veterans Affairs. We're getting into the mobile development space, and so I'm trying to get up to speed on JavaScript and the jQuery mobile library.
Jim Wally, consultant at Solom Consulting, doing primarily custom app dev, .NET, and JavaScript and such. Just want to keep aware of what are the new tools out there.
Logan Gray, independent developer. I play with everything.
I'm David Enad. I'm from Cox Media Group Digital, UI development. Chris Brading. I'm a WordPress/JavaScript developer. And I also help out at the workshop, which we have the first Monday of every month. So if you're fairly new to JavaScript or want some help, make sure to come check us out.
For Dallas Helmers, I'm a front-end developer. I work at Turner Broadcasting. And I'm just interested in finding out more about frameworks.
All right.
I'm here soon, front-end developer at Prime Media. JavaScript. Michael Burns, UI developer with Cox Media Group Digital. Just learning more.
Ganesh, I'm a .NET developer. I came here to explore JavaScript.
Alicia Rochelle, front-end developer at GetMembers.com, just coming to learn more about JavaScript frameworks.
My name is Amy Blankenship, and I'm a Flash and Flex developer for a company called Shaker Technology that builds pre-employment assessment. And I'm just kind of marking down that we're ready to move to JavaScript HTML1.
I'm Mark Redfern, freelancer. I'm here just to sharpen my JavaScript skills and work on doing some mobile development.
I'm Joe Woods. I was interested in the design patterns, hoping to possibly see a little bit on TDD with JavaScript and some of the patterns. It may not be tonight, but definitely something interesting.
I'm Sean Durkin. I work for the software developer. I work with JavaScript. I'd like to learn more about it.
Rusty Baker with Formulas at Locky.com. Just doing JavaScript, trying to build it as possible.
I'm Michael Potter, independent consultant, and I'll go to any presentation that Pratik does.
We did it without it.
You're waiting falsely.
The district planning, working with Summit with some quality control and prevention. I've been doing more and more JavaScript these days, and my course is my favorite something I can add some digital skills.
John Allen, I work at a mobile app developer, and we use Studio, which uses JavaScript. I'm Keith Lynn. I'm a management and development consultant, and I just want to learn more about the framework.
I'm Frank Thomas. I do a lot of freelance, a lot of WordPress, and there's another way
I'm Jennifer, UI designer. I kind of take it JavaScript if you know it.
I'm Brian. I'm a backbone Marionette Rails developer from Thompson, Pennsylvania. Sandy Graham, software engineer, ASP.NET, IAC. So, interesting how the JavaScript
Good Nixon, independent, and I liked last month's meeting, so I came back.
Hey, right. Everybody else.
Hi, I'm Michael Pinard. I'm with Bridge 2 Solutions. I'm primarily a back-end developer historically, but I have done some front-end, kind of a mix. Using Scala and Play. I'm happy to get back more into the front-end implementing project. Best practice.
Hi, I'm Corwin. I'm a freelancer developer.
All right, and then there were a few that came in. Do you guys want to say hello? Or?
I'm Anuj. I'm just a newbie trying to learn JavaScript.
I'm Tim Sotak, work for HP, just trying to get up to speed on the latest and greatest JavaScript frameworks.
I'm Madeline. Well, I'm a front-end developer. Just want to know more about JavaScript.
Very cool. Did we miss anybody that is eager to say hello?
You.
I don't want to. I just say every other word.
Yeah, I'll always talk. My name is Lisa Wheeler. I'm with CCCI, and CCCI is an IT staffing leader in service value and positive impact here in Atlanta, and we are one of the sponsors of the group. And CCCI also stands for Comprehensive Computer Consulting, Inc., but it also stands for Clients, Consultants, Community, and Industry. So that's part of the reason why we're here is to give back to the community. And as it says on the meetup, we sponsor the giveaways and the awards for the lightning talk. So tonight I've got some books on iOS, and then I've got some other things for you to take with you tonight too, some mints and little things for your badges and things like that. So stop by, and whether you're interested in opportunity now or in the future, or whether or not you have an IT problem and you're looking for someone to help you with the solution for that, we'd appreciate the opportunity to connect with you. Thank you.
Cool. All right, and so is there anybody else? So kind of rolling in with that, our sponsors. Matrix is one of our sponsors. They provide us with space, and they provided us with space actually for the last 2 years. And this month is actually going to mark the last month that we'll be meeting at Matrix. They're going to be moving to a new office that's not going to be able to accommodate our group. So next month we are going to be holding our meetup in a new location, which I'll announce in a second. The little pie piece over there is Savant Group. That's a company that I work for. We do development, hosting, and managed services, and of course CCCI with Lisa. And so if you want to get involved, whether it's sponsoring or presenting or helping us plan or promoting these events, or even recording them, please reach out to us at present@atlantajavascript.com. That'll go to myself and Toby. Toby is another organizer of the group and works with Chris at the workshops. So our upcoming events, we've got the workshop, which is going to be October 1st, and that is at CCCI's office. And that's really kind of hands-on, gets you a lot of great experience. Toby, do you want to say anything about workshop, or maybe at the end of the meeting? At the end of the meeting?
We teach you JavaScript.
Yeah, there you go.
and we're doing a thing where we're gonna try to be helpful to a variety of levels. So we're calling it, well, I don't know. We're trying this reverse classroom approach, where rather than me lecturing you on something and then doing some work, you're gonna view the lectures at home and then come in and do either the exercises associated with the lectures, or you could work on a project that you just want to do. And it's more or less like office hours, so it's going to help you if the problems arise when you're working on the exercises or assignments.
Yeah, and that's a new format that kind of just recently implemented and has got a lot of really good feedback. So definitely check it out. Even if it might sound a little different, definitely give it a shot because it's cool. And then, like I said, we've got a new location for our next meetup in October 15th. What we're going to be doing, we announced at the last month's meeting that in October we're going to be meeting at a new space. In November we're going to be trying a new format at likely a different space. In December, we're going to do a holiday party, and then in January, we're going to announce kind of the direction of the group. If the new format in November works, we'll stick with that. If not, we'll revert back to this, as well as we'll announce our future home for at least that upcoming year. So our meeting next month is going to be at Ogilvy's office, which is in Atlantic Station. They've offered to provide us with space. They've got ample free 2-hour parking. They're going to be providing us with pizza. They worked with Coca-Cola on the freestyle machines, so they've got a freestyle machine so you can create some concoction that you might not want to drink. But that's where we'll be next month, and we'll be posting that onto the meetup group here shortly as well. And then with that being said, we are still open to suggestions if anybody has a location that would want to house us next year. We want to keep the door open because we get a lot of feedback about the parts of town that work and don't work, and we want to make sure that it works for as many people as possible because understand that is coming into town, a little more so than this. So that's the future. Let's talk about now. We've done the welcome, we've done food, we're in the process of food, I think. And then we're going to dive into the presentation, do some lightning talks, and then wrap up, do some drinks, and see how that goes. So today's presentation is going to be done by Pratik, who is a longtime, supporter of the JavaScript group, as well as the organizer of a couple other groups, including the Accelerator Titanium group. He's currently with TripLingo, and I'll let him kind of introduce himself a little bit more thoroughly.
How's everyone doing?
Tired?
Good. It's Monday. I know it's been raining, so everyone's in a funky mood, I imagine. Before I get started, there are a couple of things I wanted to throw out there. Hopefully I don't make Randall mad or maybe other groups. But as Randall said, I know there are a lot of folks interested in mobile development. There is a current mobile dev group out on Meetup called the Atlanta Mobile Developers Group. Note the group at the end. That is a defunct group which has been abandoned. So me and a couple other folks who do a lot of mobile dev in town have started a new meetup called simply the Atlanta Mobile Developer. Okay? If you go to the group, and I would just show you, but the internet is down, you'll see my picture and my name next to the one of the organizers there. Okay? But we're rebooting the group, and we have a ton of interesting stuff coming down the pipe, especially if you do HTML and JavaScript. For example, we have the creator of PhoneGap coming down later this year, Brian LaRue, in December to come give a talk and a State of the Union on PhoneGap, which is a way of creating native mobile applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you guys may be interested in that. One thing that we're going to announce very soon is that there's going to be a sponsored hackathon on November 2nd and 3rd for basically it's a mobile hackathon. I'm not sure exactly the location yet, but it's going to be a Friday night and Saturday, and there's going to be prizes. There's some big names sponsoring it like AT&T, so that's going to be pretty big. And if any of you want to escape the corporate world like I did a couple of years ago, a good place to start is to go to the Startup Weekend and hack over the weekend and hopefully find a cool team of folks to work with. If not, you can feel proud in building something over a weekend and hopefully win some prizes and stuff. But I just got the announcement earlier today that the fall edition of Startup Weekend is on November 9th through the 11th. So it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The company that I work for currently and co-founded, called TripLingo, actually came out of a Startup Weekend in February of 2011. Okay? And there were actually several companies that came out of that Startup Weekend. We were one of 3 companies, I believe, that are still surviving from it, which is a pretty good survival rate. But it's well worth your time if you're looking to escape the corporate world and do something more interesting or on your own. Finally, Randall already mentioned this, but if you're interested in doing mobile development with JavaScript, me and a couple other guys run the Atlanta Titanium Developers Group here in town. We meet at the end of the month, the last Wednesday or Thursday of the month. I don't remember. 26th, thank you. On the 26th. I'm not sure what this month's topic is because one of the other guys is setting it up for this month. But anyways, you should check these out if you are interested. All right, so before we launch into this, just want to get an idea. How many folks are using Backbone in here? I know one person I think she's using it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wow, are you using it too, Tony? Oh, okay, so you guys may be a little bit bored towards the end of this, and I apologize for that, but it is as advertised, a session on frameworks, patterns, and I don't know, did I have Backbone in the title? Did I put Backbone implicitly in the title?
Yes, you did.
I did put in the description?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so there's no false advertising there. And this is what we're going to talk about. And one of the problems with the whole JavaScript landscape currently is that it's extremely exciting, but there's a ton of frameworks out there. And there's a new framework like every week that looks kind of interesting and or compelling. And one of the reasons I put this session together, and this is, I've given a variation of this session a bunch of times before at a couple of different conferences. And I'm actually giving, where's Vandal at? He's on, anyways. I'm giving this session at HTML5 DevCon and JS Everywhere in San Francisco in October. But one of the reasons why I do this is because a lot of folks don't understand what these frameworks do, what the magic happens, what is the magic that's happening underneath, and probably most importantly, how do you pick a framework, right? How do you do something with it to fit your needs? And so I'm not going to tell you which framework to use. Okay, Backbone is only here as an example to demonstrate some of the JavaScript patterns being applied to a specific framework. Okay. So here's just a few of the frameworks that you may have heard of. Okay, so aside from Backbone, is anyone using Ember.js? No one. Wow, that's really interesting. There's always at least one person who's interested in it. I'd use that. Okay, how about Angular? Okay, a few folks using Angular. That's interesting. Let's see, what else? What's that? Node. It's more like a server-side engine web. I guess it's a framework, but let me rephrase the question. Who's using a client-side framework? I'm just joking. But yes, client-side. Anyone else using something more esoteric than that? Yes, sir.
YUI.
YUI, I guess that's a full-blown framework, yeah. Knockout, anyone using Knockout? Okay. Spine? Batman? We could go on all night, but anyways, there's a ton of frameworks. And what I found doing research when we wanted to use a framework over at TripLingo for our upcoming web edition. Right now, currently, TripLingo is only available on one of these things, right? iPhone, Android, No Color, Amazon Fire, basically in the mobile space as a native app. But we're eventually branching out, and we're going to take on Rosetta Stone in the language space. So we need a compelling web edition of our software. And we started doing this about a year ago, and it was a total disaster because we all had different styles on the team, and we figured out very quickly that we needed to kind of coalesce around some kind of structure. Right? We could have built our own, but why build your own when you can go and get something off the shelf that works reasonably well, right? And that's probably the last time you'll ever hear me say, why did I just build my own? I'm normally just go and build my own stuff if I can. So why even bother? The problem is it's JavaScript as a language provides little in the way of high-level abstractions and utilities to be able to implement a lot of different things. So one thing that I've been playing with quite a bit is ClojureScript. It basically is a Lisp that runs, it's basically a Lisp that runs on, in the web browser. Okay, you write in Clojure, which is a programming language that's a Lisp, and it uses a bunch of tools underneath the hood and converts it all down into JavaScript. Okay, so you're going from a Lisp to a JavaScript. But you don't really need a lot of abstractions with something like that because the language is so powerful and gives you so many utilities that you don't really need stuff like backbone and all this other crap, right? I shouldn't say crap, but all this other useful stuff. I would love to use Lisp, but I don't. The 3 other developers on my team would kill me if I picked that. So, anyways, that's a different discussion altogether. But the other big reason is that even a small project can become a mess pretty quickly if you don't have some kind of structure, right? And you can build your own structure, obviously. But you know, you can build your own structure and have your own kind of in-house conventions, idioms, and rules to be able to build a nice web application. But the other problem is that even if you do that, you end up writing a lot of boilerplate code. You end up doing a lot of copy and pasting, or things don't seem efficient when you're coding up something, okay? And this is part of the reason that a lot of these frameworks are useful is that you get a certain level of reusability, not just from what the framework provides you, but also with what you code yourself. It gives you a way to build reusable components almost, okay? Both at the UI level and at the underlying kind of business logic client-side level, right? So one of the things that we've started doing is we've started small. We've thrown away a lot of the internal crappy code we have that works with collections and various other things, and we've been using underscore. If you're not using underscore already, you probably should. And if you don't like underscore, you can use Sugar.js, which is very similar to underscore. And some of the other things that we use are Big.js, and we currently use jQuery, but we're in the process of dumping it for something much slimmer. We're going to actually be moving to Zepto instead of jQuery, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, jQuery is too big, and we're also targeting the mobile web and tablets with our web edition, along with the native app. And jQuery comes in at, I don't know, what's the latest, like jQuery 1.7.2 comes in at like 27 or 28 kilobytes. Zepto comes in at a whopping 2.2 kilobytes, so it runs really fast and loads really quickly on mobile devices and on tablets, okay? But that's just us. Yes?
Is that also only WebKit, or is it?
It is WebKit,
Okay.
yes. So there's a little caveat there. One of the reasons why Zepto can be so small is because they don't care about IE. And honestly, we're just going to force our customers to use IE. Sorry, not use IE. Use something like either Chrome, Firefox, or mobile or desktop Safari.
Okay, because I thought it didn't support Firefox either. Is that not?
They've improved some of the support for it, right? So, yeah. But we'll just work with this on Chrome. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about, how many folks have not used any kind of framework whatsoever? Forget about jQuery. I don't count that as a framework. Sorry, you can raise your hand. It's not a sin to not use a framework. Okay. So so this specific section of the talk is aimed at. Okay. I'm going to talk very briefly about this growing concept called SPA, S-P-A, and SOFIA. SPA stands for Single Page Applications, which is kind of a relatively new term, but it's been around for a little while. Okay? There's actually a very good book in pre-release, about half the book is there, called Single Page Applications by Manning. He does a very good job of kind of laying out all the stuff that you need to know if you're building a serious single page application. But the concept of this has been around for a long time. There's something called SOFIA, Service-Oriented Front-End Architectures. Okay, so the basic premise of these things is that we move stuff to the client and the back end does less. Okay, and if you're like me, I've been developing web apps for a long time. Okay, and one of the things I never really got comfortable with is when I was doing JSP, or even back in the late 90s, I was building dynamic web apps using Perl, God forbid. You would construct all this HTML essentially and generate it on the back end, right? Doesn't matter if you're using Rails or Django, some kind of Java-based platform like Rails, Spring Web Services. Essentially what you're doing is you're constructing and generating HTML on the server. And you're pushing all that code up to the client, right? I should he said, everyone should not, because everyone is probably doing this today, all right? And I've never been comfortable with the idea of generating anything, okay? And over the last few years, I would say probably it's from about late 2007 to 2008-ish, there's been this growing movement in the web community to stop using these kind of big generation frameworks on the back end where you generate the HTML. You use less than Sass on the back end to generate CSS, you know, and you generate some JavaScript using require.js. Whatever, you're doing all this generation, it's hugely complicated. You're doing it all on the server. That's not the target platform. The target platform is the browser, but you're building all this stuff on the server and whatever it may be running, okay? The idea with SPA and with Sophia is that you move the client processing from the server to the client, where it belongs, okay? And that's what a lot of these frameworks help you do. They essentially help you move stuff off of the server and onto the client. Again, this is client-side business logic and client-side, essentially presentation logic, right? And essentially the server just becomes some kind of RESTful endpoint. Of course, you're gonna have some business logic on the server, but you're not doing page construction anymore on the server. This is the whole idea behind almost every one of these frameworks. It's very important to understand the motivation for building, the motivation for how these frameworks work. Because inevitably, when I start talking about backbone and how it works, someone will ask, well, what happens if you reload the page? Or, you know, when you click something, does it reload the page? Well, the idea is that no, it doesn't. You never reload the page in almost all of these different frameworks that are out there for doing client-side JavaScript. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Is there a question? Yes, sir.
What about ramifications around SEO?
About what?
Search engine optimization ramifications.
Yeah. So SEO is a good one. Typically, when we're talking about something like this, we are not so concerned about SEO. So this is like you've seen the kind of like the catalog for, let's say you're building a shopping site. You have the catalog. This is something that would pop in that would be like kind of basically the shopping cart end portion of it, where you build and you can update, remove stuff from the cart, put in your credit card, place the order, pick shipping options, stuff like that. Okay, so it's more geared towards an application rather than kind of a general website.
A membership site or something.
Right, or a membership site or something like that. That's right.
Yeah, user requires login, so
right, a user requires
crawled anyway.
Right, it couldn't be crawled anyway because typically this is something that happens after a user authenticates and you're into quote unquote an application and not so much a website. That's a good question. Any other questions? Are we power on? And where's Randall at? Is he still in here? I have no idea how I'm going to finish this in 20 minutes. Go ahead.
Our devs at CMTV just came back from VelocityConf, one of the presentations from one of the guys from the Twitter Bootstrap project. Kind of turned that all around. They actually just redid all their entire platform because they pushed too much to the front to the client, and it was killing performance. Can you speak to that?
They pushed too much to the client and it was killing performance.
Yeah, they were doing pretty much everything as much as possible on the client side. HTML, JavaScript, running app, doing all the things on the front end. Where does that sort of situation come in? Where you can
so I haven't heard of this specific story that you're talking about. But if they were running into a performance issue on the client side, on a modern web browser, on modern equipment, maybe they're doing something wrong. I mean, you built a huge app using Backbone. Do you have performance issues on the client?
Unless they're like calculating prime numbers or stuff like that, if anything, you're decreasing the bottleneck. So, I mean, maybe they're just doing massive types of calculations that should have probably been moved to the server anyway, but in a properly designed application, that is almost never going to happen.
I think in Twitter's case too, they also are targeting much more constrained devices. Although we have smartphones, iPhones, and Android primarily in the U.S., you get outside the U.S., you get a lot more feature phones. And I suspect that was part of their motivation, was to service those users as well.
That's true. It may be running on constrained devices. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer to your question, but I mean, I know Brian has built a pretty significant app using Backbone. And he demoed it a few months ago, and it's a pretty complex, heavyweight app, and you guys don't have performance issues on the client, do you?
Yeah. It's way better on the client.
Performance is another topic. like client-side performance. Like
Yeah.
one simple thing, like you could advise is just to make sure the number of DOM elements is minimized. Like if you look at Gmail, for example,
Yeah.
that's a good example of a loaded app where they're just using layers and layers of elements, and a lot of them might not be necessary. But
yeah, so I think to distill your comment, it would be that doing this is not easy, it's hard, right? It's harder than, it's only hard because we haven't been doing it for a while, right? We're used to doing page construction on the back end, and we build apps that are optimized for doing page construction and page rendering, not so much running code on the client itself. So in a lot of ways, this is new for a lot of us, right? I know it's new, relatively new for me, and we'll probably hit some issues with performance and other things along the way, but we'll have to adapt to that, especially once you get down the path, you're committed to doing something, you have to make it work. All right, let's move on a bit. Let's talk about some JavaScript patterns. All right, these are the patterns I'm going to talk about very quickly. I'm playing time box here, but the module, pub sub, mixin, prototype command, and I'll touch a little bit on the way that the JavaScript frameworks do something that is similar to MVC. Okay, it's not really MVC in the classic sense that you may have seen, but we'll talk about that very briefly. All right, so the first one, there was actually an entire discussion on the module pattern last month, so I don't want to talk too much in detail about this, but I think this is important to understand. When you look at how these, if you go look at the source code for Backbone or any one of these other frameworks, almost all of them use the module pattern very heavily. And even in the code examples that you see out on the web for Backbone or Android or whatever it may be, they use the module pattern in the actual implementation quite heavily. All right, so let's have a quick look at a module pattern. Can everybody read that? Yeah. All right, so this is a very basic module in JavaScript. Okay, what you do is you have what's called an immediate function. That is what this first parentheses and this last parentheses does here. You can see how there's an open close parentheses here at the end. That basically invokes that immediate function, right? You can see there's a function here at the top. So the way JavaScript works is that JavaScript does two things when it opens your file. It does a parse step and then an execution step. This specifically is actually run during the execution step, not during the parse step. Okay? It's important to understand that. I can talk a little bit more about that and show you the difference in a few minutes if you like. But what we're doing here is you can see we have a return statement, and then we have, essentially we're constructing a new object. So when you use a squiggly like this, anywhere you use it, it doesn't matter if it's in a return statement or a variable assignment, you're basically constructing a new JavaScript object. This could very easily just be replaced with new object, and you create a new object. Anyways, we're creating a new object, increment counter, and we're passing it a function as a reference to this variable. Similarly here, reset counter. Okay, and then to use this, you would do test module dot increment counter or test module dot reset counter. Okay, this is a basic module pattern. Let's look at something a little bit more specific, and this is the style in which folks code nowadays. It's called the revealing module pattern. Okay, again, you have an immediate function. Here's the open parens, close parens all the way down here. Okay. We have some variables that we've contained within it. We've created some functions, function update person, set person, get person. And then here in the return, we're doing set colon set person, get colon get person. So we're actually passing back a brand new object that only has two elements in it. Maybe elements isn't a great word. Two variables, right? Two functions, whatever. Set and get. And those refer to this thing and this thing specifically. Okay, and to use this, what I would do is I would do user service.get, and that would execute this bit of code and return the name to me. Okay, this is a standard module, revealing module pattern implementation. You will see this everywhere nowadays when you look at examples of how people actually code up JavaScript, both for building a framework and for consuming, i.e. using one of these frameworks. Okay, any questions on this? This is pretty straightforward. One variation of this is the import mixin module, and a few folks use this in some places. This is our basic user service. Again, I've truncated it a little bit for brevity, but you can see what we do is we define, we import some variable here. Don't worry about what the require does. This is just a known example. This could very well be just jQuery. that we're importing in earlier on a page. But what we do here is if you look at the underscore closely here, and you look at the underscore here, you can see we're essentially passing in a reference to this other library right here. In this case, it's underscore. And when we initialize the function, because we're passing it in here, it comes into here, and then we're able to access that specific library inside of it, okay? This is just it is more than anything, obviously, if you declare this at the global scope, I could just do underscore dot and use that library. But this is just a neat way, or a more organized way of being able to kind of say, okay, my function needs this thing to operate, so I'm going to pass it in jQuery, and I'm going to pass it in underscore. So it's kind of like a way of defining an object constructor almost, if you're used to C# or Java or Ruby or whatever it may be. Okay? All right. So the next pattern is the pub sub or observer pattern. This is your classic observer or publish subscribe type pattern. This is used quite a bit for doing dynamic update of UI elements and also for data synchronization in frameworks like Backbone, Ember, Knockout, whatever it may be. Okay. The difference between a standard observer pattern and a pub sub pattern is that a pub sub uses an event channel to decouple the observer and sender. When you typically use an observer pattern, you're tying together the observer and the sender very tightly. Okay, they both have basically the sender has to know about the observer. Okay, with a public subscribe type of thing, the sender doesn't know about the observer directly, and the observer has no idea who the sender is. It just comes in over some kind of generic bus. To give you an example of that, I'm not actually going to code one out because it would be a long code example, but to give you something that's more concrete, if we look at how Backbone uses the pub sub and the pub sub pattern, and we'll see this in code in a few minutes if we have some time, is when we create a domain object called to-dos, we can do a .trigger reset, and this is essentially it's acting as a sender and sending a reset event, and then somewhere in your code you can say, whenever I receive a reset event, to-dos is my model object, .on, when I get a reset, the reset event, go and do these things after. Those are the arguments for what I should do afterwards, or when this event comes in, okay? And I can fire this event from anywhere by specifically referring to that object, and simple publish subscribe, okay? And obviously you can have multiple things that listen for the on, and multiple things that can trigger an event to somewhere.
Does Backbone provide the trigger and all events? Or
Yes. Yeah. So the question was, is this something built into Backbone? Yes. The .trigger and the .on is something that is specific to Backbone. All right? Next one, mixin. This is used everywhere in these frameworks in various different ways. A mixin pattern is actually quite simple. It's you're inheriting properties from a base object into an existing other object. Okay? So it's kind of like an extends behavior, or another way you can think of it, it's like object augmentation. It's saying, I have an object here, I have some properties here, I want these properties to be mixed in or become a part of this object or that over here, okay? Let's look at a quick example of this. Okay, let's say we declared a mix-in like this. Okay, and again, when you have the squigglies here, you're just creating a JavaScript object. I could create the same object doing new object, and then object my mixins dot move up equals function blah blah blah. But this is kind of the convention of a lot of things right now. Okay, so this is my actual mixin. What I'm going to do with this mixin is I have a car animator object here. Okay, and this car animator only does a move left. My mixin does a move up and move down. What I want to do is I want my car now to be not only to be able to move left, but I want it to go up and down. So I want to mix in the functionality that I have in this mixin or this other object into this specific object. Now underscore provides a handy way of doing this by using the dot extend. So what it does is it takes the first argument and mixes in what's in the second argument into the first. So now what I can do is once I've done this, I can do car animator dot move up, and it will basically just appear as if it's part of the object. Okay? Does it make sense to everybody? Kind of like combining two objects together almost, right? And I can get into some more examples of where and how this is used, but this is quite common for a lot of different things.
It also overrides.
Right. So one thing to note is, depending on the implementation, well, not usually depending on the implementation. The idea here is that if my mixin contained a move left function within it, it would overwrite the one that was in the original one. So you can also overwrite something by having a mixin already have that specific function. Okay? All right. So let's talk about prototypes a little bit. This is also a way of doing extension. A lot of the frameworks, you rely on prototypes for doing extensions. So it's, even though I don't personally like to use prototypes a lot in my own code, sometimes when you use these frameworks, you're forced to extend a prototype in some way. So it's important to talk about this. Okay, so here we have a prototype. Okay, a basic prototype object. It has a couple functions in it: init, get model, right? And this is just an object, right? Ignore what the name really says here. Okay, just a basic object with two functions: init and get model. All right. So this is specifically an example of parasitic inheritance in JavaScript. What we do is we new up a blank object here within this vehicle. We set the prototype of this blank object to be what we had on the previous page. Right? This is the vehicle. It has an init and a get model function within. Okay. Then we new this thing up that has this prototype as the base object, and then we can call f.init. You can see there's no f.init. There's no init method in here or function in here at all, but it is existing in the prototype. So I have access to this init because I've inherited from this new object here from basically a base prototype. So essentially, it's like doing subclassing in Java or in C# or in Ruby. Okay.
Why don't you like using prototypes?
Let me defer that question.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I could talk about that for half an hour. So anyways, once you've done this, you can see we have this vehicle. We do var car equals vehicle. We get back this extended object, and we can do car.get model. You see that the get model function doesn't exist in here at all. But if we go back, it's in this prototype that we inherited from when we set the prototype of the base object. You can see that this function is actually returning that base object that we need up here to return that. Okay. So hopefully this is as complicated as this talk gets, if I remember. I know it's late. It's hard to keep up with all this stuff. All right. So finally, the command pattern. And this is probably the one that you notice the most. And when you're working with frameworks, you get that WTF moment. Like, why do they do this like this? This is so crazy. Okay. The reason why you use the command, you have to use the command pattern in JavaScript is because, again, the language has certain limitations. It doesn't let you do something like a method missing that you can do in Ruby or in Groovy and do overriding of properties at runtime or declaration of properties at runtime. Okay, what does that mean? Let's have a look at a simple example. Here we have a car manager object, var car manager. It has a few things inside of it: request info, buy vehicle, arrange viewing. These are all functions. So arrange viewing is a function that basically says you have successfully booked a viewing of model plus ID. Okay. Obviously, somewhere else we're going to initialize those variables, model and ID, but this is just a basic object. We're not doing anything fancy in here. All right. So at the top is an implementation, a poor man's implementation of the command pattern in JavaScript. You're welcome to read through it and figure out what it does. It's actually not that difficult. It basically says car manager name.apply. The apply function in JavaScript is a way of invoking a function by name, i.e. by string, rather than by a direct dot invocation. What does that mean? Once I have this command pattern execution logic here, I can do car manager dot execute and pass in the name of a function by name, by string, right? Typically how you would do this is you do car manager dot arrange viewing and passing the parameters, right? This is essentially introducing some indirection so that a framework builder can go in and do some stuff, whatever that stuff may be. We'll see a lot of this. So this is a basic command pattern implementation or example in JavaScript. Okay? All right. So I'm only going to talk about this very quickly. The way that the framework builders have done a lot of the modeling of model view controller, i.e. MVC, because it runs on the client, they've done different frameworks implement the MVC pattern in different ways. I'm going to specifically talk about how Backbone does it. One of the curious things about Backbone, it doesn't have the notion of a true controller. Okay, it uses something what's called a view model. Okay, and I don't completely understand that. I might have to ask Brian how it really works, or what the point of it is in terms of how they structured it. But typically you get models, you get views, and you get some kind of controller, right? Backbone does what's called MVVM, which is model view, view model. Okay, the view model is one word, okay? And other frameworks like Knockout, or is it Knockout or Angular? I always get confused. They do what's called model view and presenter. Okay, it's a different abstraction of what you would consider to be a classic controller type of architecture. But we'll see that specifically in code. Okay? As we're going through this example on Backbone, try to keep in mind how these patterns are being applied. This is the useful part of this exercise. Okay, the one's no longer working. That's weird. Okay, so Backbone. So Backbone is probably the most popular contract framework for JavaScript currently. It's by the guy who did CoffeeScript and Underscore. It is very much a minimal framework. They don't give you anything in terms of a specific user interface toolkit, widget kit. Okay, it's basically a bring your own view kind of thing. They don't give you stuff like Sencha Touch does, or sorry, Sencha/Sencha Touch, or EXTJS in terms of actual widgetry for buttons and labels and whatever it may be. You bring your own view, okay? Typically the views that people use with Backbone are just straight HTML. They're not using a high level or a big widget toolkit around it, okay? Let's look at a quick example of some of these things. When we look at the view in just a second, these are some of the methods around the view. One of the interesting things about Backbone is that you can either use jQuery or you can just plug in Zepto as the underlying DOM utility library. Because that's all jQuery is in a lot of ways. It's probably a little bit of an understatement, but jQuery is primarily used for working with the DOM, the documented object model, HTML essentially. Okay? And they have a bunch of utilities and stuff in there too, so I don't want to slight them in any way. But that's what people typically use it for. Okay? Zepto is a very lightweight version of jQuery that is specifically targeted towards WebKit-based browsers like desktop Chrome, desktop Safari, mobile Safari on the iPhone, the Android web browser, and a few other places that use WebKit. Okay? All right, so first let's start with templating. When you're using Backbone, again, it's a bring your own view kind of thing. What you do in your HTML code is you provide some kind of template. In this case, we're just saying put it in the script tag. The ID is item-template, and here's the name, okay, contained within a script tag. All right. Now, when you create a Backbone view, what you do with this template is you go and reference it. You can see that this is using a dollar. So it's actually using jQuery here in line with the other JavaScript to get a reference to that item template, and then we do .html to actually return the contents of that specific template. So it's basically just reaching into the HTML and grabbing the stuff on the inside of what is essentially the template, the inside part of this template. All right. If we look at the render function for this specific view, you'll see that it just does this.template, and this.template is an internal function. The this.model.json takes the internal representation of a Backbone model, and it just creates a JSON object and pushes it down into the template rendering engine, and you get a substitution for whatever, for a name property that's contained within the JSON. And this will become a little clearer as we go forward. Okay? Actually, I want to come back to routing in a few minutes. All right, let's talk about models first. All right, when we talk about models, the basic way that you create a model is by doing backbone.model.extend, and then you can pass it in some properties to initialize it with some defaults, okay? So once you have this model type declared, very important the word type here. We're not actually creating a model object or instance yet. We're just creating the type. Once you have the type declared, what you do is you say var item, lowercase I, equals new item. And then you can go and set an arbitrary number of properties, essentially key value pairs, which are the properties or the data of that specific model, okay? And then once you've done that, you can hit an item.save. Now, a couple of things happen with Backbone, okay? This is the reason for some of this indirection. When what you really want to do here is you don't want to do item.set and then pass it in name, pencil, right? That just seems like a lot of extra typing and work for nothing, which is true. One of the reasons why, and again, this is the Backbone's, one of the ways Backbone uses the command pattern. When you do this, what this does is Backbone will send out a change event. So anyone can listen for a change to this item object happening, okay? And they can receive that event and they can say, oh, okay, it looks like the server pushed up a new version of this item object. I'm going to dynamically go and call and change something in the view so that the name has changed or whatever, right? So this is kind of the way that the dynamic and automatic updating UI elements works, is that whenever you do a set, in this case, it goes and fires a change event, and someone can listen for it. You can listen for it and say, all right, I need to go and update the item list on this, or just basically that one item cell and say the name has changed from pencil to pen, or whatever it may be, okay? Similarly, when you do item.save, this triggers an underlying Backbone sync event. Now it's up to you as the programmer to decide what to do on this, okay? You may just want to go and just keep it locally until the user is finished filling out all their details for checking out of a shopping cart, or you may just want to say, all right, this is important data. I'm going to go ahead and do a synchronization with the server on the back end and trigger a remote sync to a REST endpoint and save that data on the server. Yes, sir.
The change event that gets fired, is that one change event for each property that's set, or is it one change event per set with?
It's one change event per set.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I guess theoretically they could fire a change event per, is that right?
No, it's one change event for each property that was changed. Well, it's actually both. There's the root change event that's fired, so you can just bind to that and say, hey, when anything changes, let me know. Or you can actually bind to change what that property is. So you say only listen for the name change event.
Okay.
Which would only get fired when name change.
Right.
I only ever use it when the whole thing changes, but I guess it's useful in some cases to fire it when a specific property changes. Okay. So we look at some more model stuff here. This is specifically from the to-do example that's out on the web. Again, we're using, you can see this is using a standard kind of extends type of operation. So we're extending a base Backbone model object. We pass it in some defaults for some elements or some data that we know we're going to keep in here. And then within here, you can also pass in certain functions that can be referenced by other things that either use the model or within the model itself. Okay, and we'll see a more detailed example of this in a couple minutes. How am I doing on time, by the way? Oh, no. How long should I go? Good. Okay. I can speak until 10 o'clock on this if I need to. I'm just joking. I'm not going to keep you guys.
Everybody stays awake that long?
Okay, so Backbone JS model. Here's some of the functions on it. We already saw the get. Similarly, you can do a .get and get a specific property out of the model object. A couple of other ones we've seen is the toJSON. The toJSON will just take just the things which are the data, not everything in the object itself, right? This JavaScript object will have tons and tons of functions and properties that are not necessarily part of the data. And in this case, it will just return a JSON of, because we only set name on this, it will only return a single, essentially a JSON, a data structure with a single data point with being name, right? Okay, let's see what else. We looked at save, fetches how you can unhollow an object from either a local or remote data store. don't want to get too much into details on it. So now you have your model objects, okay? Usually your model objects will be part of some kind of collection because you won't have just one item or one to-do thing. You'll have multiple items, multiple to-dos. And Backbone has something called a collection that you extend. So here we're doing backbone.collection.extend. We specify what kind of Backbone model object it specifically extends, okay? That's how we do it with this. We give it a base URL. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that URL is used as the URI for doing synchronization, or is that just on the client
They're
side?
a fetch and a save. Well, actually, I'm sorry, that was URL root. URL, in this case, overrides URL root.
Right.
And whatever you pass it in here is what it will use in both cases.
Right.
So during a fetch and save, it would use this.
Right. Basically, do synchronization to a remote server.
Yes.
Right. Okay?
You
So-
the URL to connect to for this collection.
Right, okay, right. So I'll talk about a bit about synchronization in a few minutes, thanks. All right, so in terms of collection objects or what they provide, obviously you can get something out of a collection, you can add and remove something out of a collection, okay? You can go and fetch a collection, so that means that once you've set Backbone up with all of the configuration parameters, a couple of config parameters you would typically give is you would give it a base URL for a REST endpoint for your model objects, okay? So that would be like yourcompany.com/data. And then everything after that is either specified explicitly with a URL or implicitly, well, it typically has to be done explicitly like this. So you could either set it as a URL here, or you go back as a URL root. Way too far back.
I think, yeah, you're going forward.
Yeah, I'm going in the wrong direction. Thanks. It's like, or as a URL root. So one of the nice things about Backbone is that it comes with out of the box remoting with a REST compliant backend. So all you have to do is you don't have to do anything special on the backend. Just create a REST compliant backend for getting items or to-dos or whatever it may be that follow the REST protocol, and Backbone handles all the remoting and synchronization for you. So for example, if we were to new up a new item object, somewhere in our configuration we would set what the base URL would be. Again, HTTP somecompany.com/data or whatever it may be, the root of your REST endpoint. And then when you do an items.fetch, it'll know how to go and query that and get all the item objects back as a part of the collection, or all the to-dos, or whatever it may be, okay? So there are a couple other useful things here. One of the other things is sorting. The Backbone framework provides client-side sorting, which can be very useful. I don't want to talk too much about that. That's getting a little bit too much into the details. We can look at an example if we want. So hopefully everyone can read this. But this is another example. I'm just kidding. You can't read this. We're going to look at this in code in a few minutes. I tried to sneak all this stuff onto a slide and it didn't work, so I figured I just put it on there to remind myself to go back and look at collections more specifically later. Okay, let's talk about views a little bit more, okay? So this is how I explain to myself, or rationalize to myself, how they come up with the name view model. Okay, so the collection is essentially a view, or is the view, into a set of model objects. Contained within the view is the model, okay, because the collection is essentially the view. Hence, you have view model. I don't know if this is an appropriate way of thinking about this. This is how I think about it. And that's why it's called MVVM. So if we go look at a specific view here, this is the to-do view. So you can see that this is the specific tag that we're going to bind to. Here we have a template. This is using an underscore template. You probably remember from the previous example, the bang item dash template, and the .html will return the contents contained within. And then when we declare this view, we also want to declare a bunch of different events for it to bind to, okay? So for example, when someone clicks the .toggle CSS attribute here, it will fire the toggle completed function that is contained within this Backbone view. I had to truncate it because there's not enough room for it, but it's down here. Similarly, if I were to if I were to click the thing that is marked in CSS as a dot destroy, it will invoke the clear function against it. Okay? So this is how kind of all this stuff is glued together. Yes, sir?
Are these delegated events, or does it happen, or delegated events to the parent node, or are these events bound to each individual node matching the selector?
It's bound, because we're talking about not at the collection level, but at a specific, like kind of, we're modeling essentially a single to-do in this case. So it's bound to that specific thing.
Okay.
But obviously, I mean, this isn't really going to change at runtime. So technically, it's bound to each one of them, but it's, the event will go to that specific one. So if you have 10 to-dos and you click one down here, it's only that to-do which gets affected.
Okay.
And you'll see why in just a second. Okay?
It's bound to the views L.
Right, it's bound to the views L, or the element that
Okay.
is specifically represents that model object on the view. It's probably the most completely the same. So here at the bottom, we have a simple render function for this specific thing. You can see what it does is it does $el.html, and then it uses the built-in templating mechanism to take the template that is grabbed from up here, right? This is the template right here, right? This .template, and it mashes the data into it, and it spits out the HTML and inserts it at the appropriate place in the code, right? Which is the element. Okay? So let's move on really quickly. And look at the overall app view, right? So we looked at one specific to-do item just a second ago, right? If we look at the entire to-do list, where do you bind something like that? So this is what's called the app view. It's just named app view, okay? And while I'm here, actually, before we get too far into some specifics about how this application works, I can find it. So this is the actual application. Okay. So we can say what needs to be done, what's supposed to be done. It's presentation. Go to Taco Mac. Okay. This is essentially the application that we're talking about, the to-dos app. Okay. So you can see that we have a list of to-dos here. We can complete a to-do, and we can delete a to-do. We can also list by completed and not completed to-dos. Let's complete one of these. Okay, we can see all of them. And this is a very simple single-page application. I'm going to talk more about the to-dos app in general in a minute. Okay, but what we're looking at here, oops, not that, screen this one. Okay, what we're looking at here is the actual entire application. What we were looking at just a second ago was basically this one line here, not the entire thing, but just one line. Okay, let's go here, and if we look, you can see it binds to the element that this is binding to is the Bang to-do app, and I'm going to show you the HTML code in just a second. We bind the specific events that we're interested in looking for. So when I hit toggle complete or clear completed, whatever, create on enter, these are different things. So this is the event. This is the specific DOM element that it's binding that event to, and this is the thing that is triggered when these two things happen. Or when this thing happens on this DOM element. Okay. So, and one thing that we'll see in the code in just a sec, I just want to point it out very quickly, is you can see here's the use of the pub sub here. So when something is added, it does a to-dos.onAdd, go and do this stuff. Okay, in this case, it's going and adding it to the view. But if we go down here, we can also say to-dos.onAll, go and render. So whenever anything happens, go and re-render something. So you kind of get an idea how the pub sub is used here for listening for different types of events that may happen throughout the application. All right. Okay, so if we look at some of the specific things that are in this view, when we want to add just one thing, you can see we do var view equals new app.to-do view. That was the thing we were just looking at, something that represents just one row or one line, if you will. The model is the to-do, and then it appends it to the Bang to-do list. It does a view.render.el, which basically does the mashing in of the template and spits out the HTML and essentially shows it on the screen. Okay? And this add all is how this specific application is going through, and for each of the to-dos which are remaining and for each of the to-dos which are completed, go and add them to this specific location. Okay? You have a question?
Yeah. So how does this play out in working on the desktop as well as working on a mobile environment?
Okay. The Backbone doesn't care whether you're running on the desktop or a mobile environment. Okay. It's very lightweight, and again, Backbone is a bring your own view type of framework. They don't prescribe any type of view technology to use. In the basic examples that I'm showing here, it's just using a standard underscore templates, right? Underscore utility library. But you could use mustache or handlebars, or if you wanted to, you could step up to something much heavier. All right, I don't know what a good example of that would be. If you don't want to use something like Sencha, with Backbone, generally speaking, because Sencha has its own underlying framework that, so it doesn't make sense to use their own underlying framework and Backbone. You don't need both of them. Okay. All right. Let's power forward a bit. I showed the template really quickly, but here's the item template. Right. So we have again, the ID's item template, which is what's getting stuck in. And then you can see this is just using standard underscore template engine. You have percent equals completed, blah, blah, blah. And then percent minus title, this just does a substitution for the data. Ceremony substitution for the data down here. It's just where it's basically, it's a basic template engine. Right? Nothing too fancy. All right, and I already talked about this a little bit, but this is where the pub sub or the kind of event bus for Backbone comes in. You can listen to certain kinds of events and do things with it as you need to. Okay, I don't really have a lot of time to talk about routes, but I'll talk about them very quickly. This specific example only defines one kind of route. This basically says that whenever something comes into the routes, invoke the set filter function. Okay. And you can have different kinds of routes, and I used to have an example of a bunch of different routes, but I wasn't tying all the routes together, so I took it out. But we'll look at that in just a second. All right, and for the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to spend some time actually looking at the actual source. So you can see how all of this actually comes all together, okay? I'm not going to anyway, so. All right. So this is the Backbone example. I'm going to talk about to-do MVC in just a second. We looked at this template earlier. Okay, if we go to the bottom of this, you'll see that it's importing a couple of things. It's importing Backbone and underscore JS, and then here's all the stuff specific for our application we have here: to-dos JS, models to-dos, collections to-dos, views to-dos, and then the overall views app.js. So let's go look at the app.js really quickly. And so this code should be familiar to you by now, okay? So again, you can see how this is done. I'm calling it an immediate function here. Here's the leading parentheses. If I go all the way to the end, well, this has been jQueried, so it's a little bit different, but the concept is the same. The element that I'm binding this specific view to, these are the events I'm interested in listening to. And then say, for example, we go look at this clear completed, right? When I click the clear completed, what happens? It goes in and invokes this clear completed function, which uses underscore for each of the to-dos which are completed, to-do, call to-do.destroy, which will go and remove it essentially from the view, okay? Okay, when we created a new to-do, right, which is basically, we came in here and we said, go to Taco Mac, and then I just hit enter, right? Tie all that together, if you look at this, we said on key press, on the new to do, on bang new to do, or hash new to do create on enter. We'll look at the HTML really quickly. Hopefully this makes sense to you now. What was it called?
Need to do.
very well past it?
16.
Line 16, yeah, thank you. So here's that new to-do right here, okay? And let me resize this window, so, okay. So here's, you can see it's just a standard input field, what needs to be done, right? When a key press happens on that, essentially an enter is called on that. What we'll want to do is we'll want it to call create on enter. So we'll look at that function contained within here. You can probably guess what this does. It does app.todos.create. Here are the attributes that were passed in, and then go and clear out that field. Right? Pretty straightforward stuff. Let's see what else I want to talk about. That's about it. I want to wrap up in the next couple minutes. So I think what I'll do is I'll just take some questions for now, but there's one other thing I do want to mention. Let me see if I have connections to interwebs. So instead of inventing my own code examples, what I did is I took the code examples from this website called todomvc.com. If you're looking at using a framework, this is a very good place to start. Okay, what they have is they have the same to-do application implemented, and of course all the source code is here, implemented in all these different frameworks. Backbone, Ember, Angular, Spline, Knockout Dojo, YUI, Batman, Clojure, GWT. Whoop, never mind. But yeah, Knockout, Dojo, whatever. Okay. So you can actually go down in, like for example, if I click on the Ember example, you will recognize it as being exactly the same app. So essentially they've implemented the same app with a bunch of these different frameworks. And if you scroll to the bottom, they actually have a bunch of other ones that are in kind of like, it's still in development. So this is a much bigger list, as you can see. One that I was really interested in for a while was, it's called CanJS. It has some interesting features that's separated from a Backbone or an Ember, but you can go and peruse that at your own discretion. But I know somebody mentioned they used EXTJS in here. Well, if you want to see how EXTJS does this, you can go look at the EXTJS example. And of course, all the source code is here, and I have it downloaded. So if you just want to grab this and run it locally, I can grab this index.html, and here you can see that I have the local example, and of course, all the source code is contained within here. But this is an excellent resource. It's led by a guy named Adi Osmani, who has written like about 24 JavaScript books in the last 2 years. I don't know how he sleeps. But the other thing I want to mention is if you want to take a deeper dive into design patterns, he also has this book, and you don't have to buy it, even though I did buy it, called Learning JavaScript Design Patterns. He actually has this entire book up on GitHub that you can go download for free if you don't want to buy it from O'Reilly. Okay? All right, so with that, I will try to wrap up and take some final questions. Yes? Any questions? No? Brain is full? Tired? Beer time? What's that? I did skip over routing. I didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, but let me quickly show a couple of things in terms of routing. The way routing typically happens, if we go to the index.html, let me find an example of where this specific application is routed. So this is an example of where routing is used. Okay. So remember here, this is this specific part of the app. So like when we said, okay, so let's say we want to see what's completed versus active. When I click this, okay, we're getting, then I have active up here. Okay, so this is that the route is manifest in the URI. Okay, and can also be manifest in a couple of different ways, but typically it's manifest in the URI. So what happens with this is when I specifically click this, and we go look at the router. Again, the router is doing something very specific here. It's using a filter instead of doing an explicit route to something. You can also specify an explicit route. So when / something happens, go and do this. And this is where you could specify this. This is just saying whenever any route comes in, go and invoke a filter called setFilter. And in this specific example, what it's doing is it's creating this to-do filter here and it's triggering a reset, which then goes into the to-dos.js. Let me see if I can find exactly what this is. It's in app.js, I think. No, sorry, it's in the collection. Okay. It is in here where they compute what to show. Unfortunately, I didn't do a great job of explaining that, but basically, the routing can be done explicitly, or you can set it to be a filter. In this case, we're saying send it to a filter and go and run the stuff. And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, I could also do something like this and say, show, let's just say, /beer, right? And on /beer, go and beer, which would be something like.
Oh, that won't work because you have a slat on line 11, which
yes.
is automatically going to get called since it's the wild
Okay,
card.
so it'll work now.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm just trying to hammer through this as quickly as possible, right? And then basically, you can do function, right? And then you can do whatever you needed to for that specific route in this case. Okay? So that's how routes work. And if we go back to the init.html, this is how you would invoke a route. And this route, when you click this thing, because you have the hash here, and you have to have the hash here, it won't go to the server. What happens is Backbone intercepts it, because when you have a hash in the URI, it doesn't go to the server. It basically looks for an anchor, and what Backbone is doing in this case is it's kind of writing on the URI to be able to do the routing, okay, or writing on the anchor to do the routing without going to the server. Okay.
Could you just speak briefly on what tools you use for debugging this?
A standard Firebug, Chrome and Firebug, nothing special. Yeah, yep. Everything happens right on the browser, Chrome and Firebug, or your favorite client-side debugging tool here. Anyways, thanks. If you have any questions, you can reach me at this email address here. You can also follow me on Twitter. I don't usually tweet that much. I tweet about mobile and JavaScript and other crap like that. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Okay?
Thank you, Pratik. And we are running a little tight on time, but I do want to squeeze in a couple of lightning talks. I know one gentleman expressed an interest. Is there any other takers on lightning talks? I guess who's going to be first? Okay. Assistant is good. Maybe change your mind.
While he's getting set up, not to hijack, I kind of want to mention something because this works off of what Pratik is saying. I'm going to be talking next month here at this group, and I'm going to be literally showing, going through like a real Backbone application that uses Marionette, which is kind of like a framework on top of a framework, and it simplifies working with Backbone massively. And I think Pratik did a great job. But if I was looking at this without having a lot of Backbone experience, I would be really lost because there's a lot of boilerplate stuff that Backbone does over and over and over again. In a real application, you're going to want to abstract all of those things. And even like that to do has like a ton of like problems in it that you would have to solve, like zombie views and events not being cleaned up when views get destroyed. So Marionette is like an application, it's like a framework that sits on top of Backbone, and it literally makes working with Backbone amazingly easy and simple. So over the last few weeks, I've built out like a real demo application. So we're going to be going through like how I built it, and it's going to be very, very digestible. I've actually recorded hours of screencasts that talk about going through it step by step. So, just kind of let everyone know. If you're interested in it, definitely show up next month.
So, at work, we are in the process of converting our public website that is only 3 or 4 years old from a redesign, but it's gotten really, really crufty, and it came out before responsive design came out. And so we're making it all responsive and nifty and everything, but we've got a lot of JavaScript that runs in there that we don't want to run on smaller devices. We only want it to run when you hit the desktop and moving stuff around and everything. So I came across this the other day. It's a cool little library called Inquire that does the same thing for JavaScript that media queries do in CSS for design. So you can have things that only run when you're at a particular device resolution or on a particular device, and you can even use it to do media query-like things in CSS when the browser doesn't support media queries. So you can use it, on a desktop to add classes and remove classes from certain, elements on the page. And so I've coded up this little test here. This is just the Twitter bootstrap. No, you're not the iPad. This all worked fine this afternoon, but I coded.
Might be a resolution. Cool with it.
Yeah, the projector's making your screen too small.
That's exactly, yes. Okay, fine. So I'll show you
It's very slow.
I'll show it in blue.
Should be able to just resize the browser window and get something else.
Get all drag and drop. Okay, so it sees that I'm in portrait mode there, and if I rotate left, it fires JavaScript that says, hey, I'm now in landscape. And that's pretty simple. All it's really doing is just, the other nice thing about Inquire is that there are no dependencies that you need for this. The implementation here that I've coded is using Bootstrap, so it's got Modernizer on it, but it's just there because Bootstrap asked for it. So here's what you do: you register your media queries, and then they've got a couple of different functions that you use. One of them is match. So when you have your environment that matches that particular media query, what do you do? And at this point, I've got a function up here which is just setting, some predefined text in the page. But it could just as easily, move things around or change classes on the page, or just whatever you need it to do. Looks like it's a pretty nifty little thing. And there's, if you missed it, there's the URL on GitHub, wikimillions.github.com.
Cool, thank you.
Sure.